The grand halls of Vexorus Prime shimmered with golden light, the air thick with the scent of exotic flowers and burning incense. This was a place of power, where rulers of alien empires made decisions that shaped the fate of entire star systems. Today, a new species stood in these halls: humans. Captain Elias Vance, dressed in his sleek black uniform, stood before the High Empress of Eldraka, Xylith the Eternal. She was tall, with dark blue skin that shimmered like polished stone. Her golden eyes glowed with an inner fire, a sign of the immense psionic power flowing through her veins. She was the ruler of the Dominion, a vast empire feared across the galaxy. Xylith looked down at Vance with amusement. "You are bold to stand before me, human. Your kind is new to the stars. Do you truly believe you can negotiate with a being like me?" Vance's expression remained calm. "I believe in humanity," he said simply. The alien empress laughed softly. It was not cruel, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen countless species rise and fall. "Your people are small, fragile. You cannot understand my power." A hush fell over the chamber. The Eldraka nobles and warriors surrounding them nodded in agreement. The Dominion was built on psionic strength, and Xylith was the strongest of them all. No race had ever resisted her will. Vance smirked. "Try me." The challenge in his voice made Xylith narrow her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not with defiance, not with confidence. She decided she would teach this human a lesson. She lifted a single hand, and the air trembled. An invisible force spread through the hall, pressing down on everyone like a great storm. The Eldraka warriors stepped back, knowing what was coming. The golden walls shimmered as reality itself bent to her will. To humans, this power was unimaginable. She could crush ships with a thought, break armies with a whisper. With only a fraction of her strength, she focused on Vance, expecting to see him fall to his knees, gasping for air. But he didn't move. Xylith frowned. She increased the pressure. The floor cracked beneath him, the energy in the air crackling like lightning. The other humans behind Vance stumbled, struggling to breathe. But he stood tall, completely unaffected. The Empress felt something she had not felt in centuries: doubt. Vance took a step forward, his gaze locked onto hers. "You're not the first species to think we're weak," he said softly. The chamber was silent. The Eldraka nobles, once smug, now looked uncertain. For the first time in her long reign, Xylith felt something deep in her chest, a flicker of fear. For the first time in centuries, Empress Xylith felt a moment of hesitation. The human, Captain Elias Vance, was standing before her, completely unaffected by her power. The force that could break lesser beings like dust in the wind had no effect on him. The Eldraka nobles around them exchanged uneasy glances. This was not how it was supposed to happen. No one resisted Xylith's psionic power. It was absolute. It was the foundation of the Dominion's rule. Her golden eyes narrowed. "You are hiding something, human," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "No one can stand against me." Vance smirked. "Maybe you're not as powerful as you think." Xylith's pride burned. She had ruled for centuries, defeated countless enemies, and crushed entire civilizations with her mind. No human would mock her and walk away. "Kneel," she commanded. The air turned heavy, like an invisible hand pressing down. The walls of the grand hall groaned under the weight of her power. The Eldraka nobles stepped back, afraid to be caught in the force of their empress's will. The human officers behind Vance gasped. One of them, a lieutenant, fell to his knees, clutching his head. Sweat dripped from their faces as they struggled to breathe. But Vance, he stood firm. Xylith's fingers curled into a fist. She sent a direct psionic attack into his mind, a force that could shatter weaker beings instantly. She expected to hear his screams, to see him fall like all the others. Instead, she felt resistance. It was like trying to push against an immovable wall. No, not just a wall. A storm, wild and unbreakable. For a moment, Xylith saw something in Vance's eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was something far worse. It was control. He was letting her push against him. He was allowing her to test his strength. A cold feeling crawled up her spine. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Vance took another step forward. The ground beneath him cracked, but he did not waver. He leaned in slightly, his voice calm, almost amused. "Is that all?" The chamber fell into stunned silence. The Eldraka nobles looked at their empress, waiting for her to do something. Xylith clenched her jaw. This was not over. If her power couldn't break him, she would show him what true strength was. Her body glowed with golden energy as she unleashed her full psionic force. The floor shattered, the walls bent outward, and a storm of power rushed toward Vance. This time, he didn't just resist. He walked through it, and for the first time in her life, Xylith felt something she never thought she would. Doubt. The grand hall of Vexorus Prime was in ruins. The floor was cracked, the golden walls bent from the force of Xylith's unleashed power. Dust and debris floated in the air, caught in the lingering energy of the psionic storm. And yet, Captain Elias Vance was still standing. The Eldraka nobles looked in shock. Their empress had just used enough power to destroy a warship, yet this human remained unharmed. Xylith's golden eyes burned with frustration. She had never faced anyone like this before. Every other race in the galaxy had bowed to her power. Every other ruler had fallen before her might. But this human, he didn't even flinch. She clenched her fists. "What are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. Vance tilted his head slightly, a small smirk playing on his lips. "We're just human," he said. "You wouldn't understand." Xylith's frustration grew. "I am the most powerful mind in the Dominion. I have bent entire civilizations to my will. I have seen the rise and fall of empires. Do you think I fear you?" Vance took another step forward. The Eldraka warriors surrounding the Empress instinctively reached for their weapons, but Xylith raised a hand to stop them. She had to know. Why? Why was he different? Vance's expression grew serious. "You think power is about crushing others beneath you," he said. "You think it's about making people kneel. But humanity has never been that way." Xylith narrowed her eyes. "Then tell me, human, what is your power?" Vance sighed, looking around at the destruction in the hall. Then he met her gaze. "It's not about strength," he said. "It's about will." Xylith frowned. "Will?" Vance nodded. "Your power comes from your mind. You can bend reality, crush ships, control others with your thoughts. But what happens when you meet something that won't break? Something that won't kneel, no matter what?" The word sent a chill down Xylith's spine. Vance continued. "You think we don't understand power? Let me tell you something. Empress, humanity has faced extinction more times than we can count. We have fought wars we had no chance of winning. We have walked through fire, through death, through the void of space itself. And do you know what we do when something tries to break us?" He took one final step forward, now standing just a few feet from her. "We endure." The chamber was silent. The Eldraka nobles looked between their empress and the human with wide, uncertain eyes. For the first time, Xylith felt something she never thought possible. Not fear, not anger, but respect. Because in that moment, she understood. This human was not invincible. He was not immune to her power. He simply refused to fall. A heavy silence filled the ruined grand hall of Vexorus Prime. The Eldraka nobles and warriors stood frozen, their golden eyes flicking between their empress and the human who had withstood her power. Empress Xylith clenched her fists. She was not used to this. Doubt. No being had ever defied her will like this human had. No race had ever resisted the might of the Eldraka Dominion. But now, this human stood before her, unshaken, unbroken. Her pride would not allow it. "Enough," she growled. "If you will not kneel, then you will fall." Vance gave her a calm, almost amused look. You sure you want to do this?" Her eyes burned with golden fire. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she attacked. A wave of pure psionic energy exploded from her outstretched hand, surging toward Vance like a tidal wave of raw power. The air crackled, the very fabric of reality bending under the force of her will. The Eldraka nobles stepped back, shielding their eyes from the blinding energy. They had seen their empress break armies with this power. They had watched entire starships crushed like paper under her wrath. But when the light faded, their eyes widened in shock. Vance was still standing. Not only that, he had taken a step forward. Zelith's breath caught. That should have been impossible. No being in the galaxy could withstand her full strength. But Vance was not just withstanding it. He was pushing through it. She gritted her teeth, pouring even more power into her attack. The golden flames surrounding her grew brighter, crackling like a living storm. The marble floor beneath her shattered, sending pieces of stone flying. And yet, Vance kept walking. Each step he took sent a jolt of fear through her. This was not normal. This was not possible. Zelith pushed harder, sweat forming on her brow. The pressure in the air grew suffocating, enough to crush lesser beings into dust. But Vance, he just smirked. Then, in a single moment, he moved. Faster than anyone expected, he closed the distance between them. Before Zelith could react, he raised his hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. She gasped as a strange sensation flooded her mind, something beyond psionics. Raw, unbreakable will. Her knees buckled for just a second, just long enough for her to realize the truth. She wasn't the hunter in this battle. She was the prey. For the first time in her long life, Empress Zelith felt true fear. For the first time in centuries, Empress Zelith felt weak. Captain Ilias Vance stood before her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. There was no aggression in his touch, no sign of an attack. But the moment his fingers made contact, she felt it. A force unlike anything she had ever encountered. It was not psionic energy. It was not raw power. It was something deeper, something far more terrifying. It was his will. Her golden eyes widened. She tried to push back, to reclaim control of the situation, but the pressure in her mind was overwhelming. This human was not just resisting her power, he was overpowering it. The Eldraka nobles watched in stunned silence. Their mighty empress, the ruler of the Dominion, the strongest psionic in the known galaxy, was frozen. Vance tilted his head slightly, studying her expression. "Now do you understand?" he asked, his voice calm. Zelith tried to speak, but her throat was dry. What are you?" Vance sighed and took a step back, releasing his hold. Immediately, she gasped for air, her body trembling as if she had been drowning. "You thought power was about control," Vance said, "about bending others to your will. But humans are different." Zelith clenched her fists, her pride refusing to accept what had just happened. "No species can resist me. No mind can stand against the Eldraka." Vance shook his head. "Your mistake was thinking power only works in one way. That if you can control minds, you control everything." He looked around the ruined hall, at the fearful expressions of the Eldraka nobles. "But humanity doesn't work that way. We don't rely on one thing. We don't break when we're beaten. We don't kneel when we're commanded." His gaze locked onto hers. "We endure." The words sent a shiver down Zelith's spine. Vance took another step forward, and though she did not move, she wanted to. For the first time, she felt an instinct she had never known before. The instinct to retreat. "You see," Vance continued, "humans don't need psionic power. We don't need to crush others with our minds. Because our strength is something you can't measure. You can't predict it. You can't control it." He leaned in slightly, his next words spoken softly, but they carried the weight of 1,000 battles. "You will never break us." The chamber remained silent. The nobles, once so confident in their empress's power, now looked at her with uncertainty. And for the first time in her life, Xylith felt something she had never felt before. Doubt in herself. The silence in the grand hall of Vexorus Prime felt heavier than any force Empress Xylith had ever unleashed. The Eldraka nobles stood frozen, their golden eyes wide with disbelief. The strongest ruler in the galaxy, the one who had bent entire civilizations to her will, had been defied. But worse than that, she had been shaken. Xylith's mind raced. How could this be happening? How could a simple human resist her? It was not possible. It should not be possible. Yet here was Captain Elias Vance, standing before her, unbowed, unbroken. She took a slow breath, trying to suppress the lingering feeling of weakness. She was still Empress. She was still the most powerful being in the Dominion. She could not, would not, let this human walk away as if he had won. She straightened her posture, her voice regaining its edge. "You think you've proven something, human," she said, her tone sharper now. "You think your little demonstration makes you my equal." Vance chuckled, shaking his head. "No," he said simply, "I'm not your equal." Xylith smirked, confidence returning. "Then you admit, I'm something else entirely." The words stopped her cold. Vance stepped forward, and this time, she did step back. It was only half a step, barely noticeable, but the nobles saw it. The warriors saw it. And she knew it. Vance's eyes didn't glow like hers. He had no psionic aura, no special energy flowing through him. Yet, standing in front of him, she felt small. Her. Small. The realization burned inside her. No, this is not how it ends. Her golden eyes flared with power, but before she could make another move, Vance spoke again. "Let me tell you what happens next." Xylith hesitated. "You can fight me again. You can try to break me, try to prove that you're still in control. But it won't work." Vance's voice was steady, confident, absolute. "And the more you try, the more your people will see the truth." His gaze flicked toward the gathered Eldraka nobles, their once loyal expressions now filled with uncertainty. They will see that their empress, the unchallenged ruler of the Dominion, is afraid of a single human. Xylith felt something inside her crack. She looked at her people, her loyal subjects, but something was different now. They weren't just looking at her for commands. They were watching her, studying her. And for the first time, she realized, they had seen her falter. Doubt had taken root. Vance took one final step forward, voice calm but unyielding. "So tell me, Empress, what will you do now?" Xylith had ruled through fear, through strength. But now, for the first time in her long reign, she had no answer. Empress Xylith stood frozen. Never in her long rule had she felt this way. Uncertain, exposed, vulnerable. The eyes of her people were on her, watching, waiting. The Eldraka nobles, once so devoted, now carried an unfamiliar emotion in their gaze. Doubt. And the human, Captain Elias Vance, stood before her, arms crossed, expression calm, unshaken. Xylith clenched her fists. This could not be happening. "You think you have won," she hissed. Vance tilted his head slightly. "Won?" He chuckled. "This was never a battle, Empress. But if it were, you lost the moment you doubted yourself." Her golden eyes burned with fury, but deep inside, she knew he was right. The Dominion had ruled through absolute power. The Empress was never questioned, never challenged. She was above all others. That was the foundation of their rule. But now, that foundation had cracked, and everyone had seen it. Vance turned, glancing at the Eldraka nobles. "Your Empress is strong, no doubt," he said. "But strength isn't enough when you rely on fear to rule." The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their heads, avoiding Xylith's gaze. Vance's voice remained steady. "Humanity understands something you do not, Empress." He looked back at her. "True power isn't about making others kneel. It's about making them stand with you." Xylith's breath hitched. Stand with me. The idea was foreign. She was the ruler. the ultimate force. No one was her equal. And yet, she looked at her people once more. Their expressions had changed. They no longer looked at her with unquestioning loyalty. Now, they were thinking. That was dangerous. That was new. You speak as if you understand my empire, human, she said, voice quieter now. But you know nothing of what it takes to rule. Vance gave her a knowing look. No, I don't rule over an empire, but I fight for something greater than fear. He took a step closer, his voice lowering. You felt it, didn't you? Zilith stiffened. Felt what? Vance's smirk returned. That moment when your power failed, when your will wasn't enough. And in that moment, you understood what it's like to be powerless. A chill ran down her spine. No, she refused to believe it. She was not powerless. Yet the memory of his touch, of that unshakable will, remained burned into her mind. Vance turned away. This isn't over, Empress. But it's the beginning of something new. He started walking toward the great doors of the hall. The Eldraka nobles didn't stop him. Zalith didn't stop him. She couldn't. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure if she should. Empress Zalith watched as Captain Elias Vance walked toward the great doors of the Grand Hall. No guards moved to stop him. No nobles spoke a word. He was leaving. Just like that. It made no sense. For centuries, the Eldraka had ruled through power and fear. No one defied them. No one walked away after challenging the Empress. Anyone who did was either crushed or made to kneel. Yet here was a human, a simple, ordinary human, doing exactly that. And no one dared stop him. Zalith's hands clenched at her sides. Something inside her twisted. This was wrong. This was not how it was supposed to go. Her pride screamed at her to act, to strike him down, to make an example of him. Yet something else, something quieter but far more powerful, held her back. Doubt. She hated the feeling. It was unfamiliar, unwelcome. But it was there. Vance reached the doorway and stopped. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried through the silent chamber. You know, Empress, power isn't just about taking. It's about what you choose to give. The words struck deeper than any weapon. Zalith inhaled sharply. What you choose to give. She had spent her entire life taking, conquering, controlling. She had never once considered anything else. The silence in the hall stretched. She could feel the tension in the air. The nobles were waiting, watching, to see what she would do. Her next decision would shape the future of the Dominion. Would she strike him down, proving to all that fear still ruled? Or would she let him go, admitting, without words, that something had changed? For the first time in her long reign, Zalith didn't know what to do. Vance waited a moment longer. Then, with a slight nod, he stepped forward and disappeared through the doors. The Grand Hall remained silent. Zalith turned her gaze to her people. Their expressions were unreadable, but she could see it in their eyes. They had seen the human leave. They had seen her let him go. And with that single action, a new idea had been planted in their minds. That fear was not absolute. Zalith took a slow, measured breath. The weight of her empire pressed down on her shoulders. She had always thought strength meant never bending, never yielding. But today, for the first time, she had hesitated. And deep inside, a whisper of something new stirred. Change. The Grand Hall of Vexorus Prime remained eerily silent long after Captain Elias Vance had disappeared through its towering doors. Empress Zalith stood still, her golden eyes scanning the faces of her people. The Eldraka nobles, once unwavering in their devotion, now carried something she had never seen before. Uncertainty. It was subtle, just a flicker in their gazes, a hesitation in their posture. But she saw it, and she knew what it meant. For the first time in her reign, her people were questioning her. Zalith's fingers twitched. Her mind raced. How had it come to this? A single human, a species deemed weak, primitive, insignificant, had walked into her throne room and done what no warrior, no rebellion, no rival empire had ever managed. He had made her hesitate. She should have struck him down. She should have crushed him beneath her power, erased his defiance from existence. And yet, she hadn't. The reason clawed at the edges of her thoughts. It wasn't just because of his strength. It wasn't even because he had resisted her psionics. It was because he had shown her something she had never seen before. Something beyond fear. She had ruled the Eldraka Dominion with absolute control. She had always believed that was the only way. That without fear, without dominance, an empire would crumble. But humans were different. Vance had no psionics, no telepathic influence. He had not used fear to command respect. Yet, somehow, he had left a mark that she could not erase. He had made her listen. The realization sent a ripple of unease through her. Could it be true? Was there another way? Her eyes flicked to her nobles again. Some avoided her gaze. Others watched her, waiting, expecting. Zelith swallowed hard. This was dangerous. If doubt spread, if her people began to believe that power was not absolute, the Dominion could fracture. And yet, another thought crept into her mind, one she had never allowed before. What if change was not weakness? Her heart pounded. The very idea was treasonous. She had built her rule on strength, on control. If she changed now, it would be seen as weakness. But if she didn't, would she be ruling an empire that was already crumbling? Zelith closed her eyes, taking a slow breath. The choice was clear. And for the first time in her long reign, she realized. She did not know if she had the strength to make it. The halls of Vexorus Prime had never felt so silent. Empress Zelith stood at the center of the grand chamber, surrounded by her nobles, warriors, and advisors. Yet, for the first time, she felt alone. Captain Ilias Vance was gone, but his presence still lingered. His words echoed in her mind. True power isn't about making others kneel. It's about making them stand with you. She clenched her fists. Her empire had thrived on dominance. It had been built on absolute control. She had crushed enemies, silenced rebellions, and made sure no one ever dared to question her. And yet today, for the first time, she had let a challenge go unanswered. Her people had seen it. They had felt it. And she could feel something shifting. A noble finally broke the silence. His voice was careful, uncertain. Empress, what are your orders? The question hung in the air. It was simple, yet so much heavier than before. Zelith's golden eyes flicked toward him. Every soul in the chamber was waiting for her response. The old Zelith would have given an order of strength. She would have commanded her forces to hunt down the human, to erase the weakness they had witnessed today. But now, would that truly restore her rule, or would it only prove that she was afraid? She exhaled slowly. The weight of her empire pressed down on her shoulders. She had a choice. She could continue ruling through fear, pretend this moment had never happened. Or she could do something no Eldraka ruler had ever done before. She could embrace change. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady. Prepare a council meeting. The nobles blinked in confusion. For what purpose, Empress? Another asked cautiously. She turned to face them fully. We need to discuss the future of the Dominion. A ripple of shock spread through the chamber. The future. Discuss. These were not words the Empress had ever used before. Zelith saw the unease in their expressions, but she also saw something else. Curiosity. The Eldraka had never questioned their way before. Fear had ensured obedience. But today, for the first time, a new thought had entered their minds. Maybe the way things had always been was not the way they had to be. She was still afraid. Change was uncertain. It was dangerous. But she had seen something in that human's eyes. Not defiance, not arrogance. Strength without cruelty. Power without fear. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she understood what true power was. Zelith straightened her posture, her voice carrying across the hall. The Dominion will not fall. It will evolve. The nobles exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared to oppose her, because despite the fear of the unknown, change had already begun.